Hello, everybody, and welcome to East City Bookshop. My name is Emily Summer. I am the book buyer here for the store, and it is a pleasure to be with you all this evening. And that includes our friends who are watching from home via Zoom webinar. So we are very glad you're here too. We are especially thrilled if you're here with us for the first time. Welcome back if you have been to events here before. And again, we're glad that people are watching from home so we have a larger audience. Before we get to tonight's conversation, I have just a couple of housekeeping notes. There will be a time for audience questions at the end, so please hold all questions until then. And we're in a small enough space too that you will not be mic'd from the audience, but Susan and Laura will repeat your questions into the microphone so that our friends watching on Zoom will be in the loop. If you need a bathroom, there is one upstairs past the cash register and the greeting cards. And more importantly, if you still need a copy of Sing the Truth or Behind You is the Sea, those copies are available upstairs as well. Laura Pegram is the founding editor and publisher of the Kweli Journal, as well as a multi-hyphenate artist. She is an author, educator, and jazz vocalist who has teamed with acclaimed jazz pianist Donald Smith for cabaret performances, and she is a painter whose murals can be found in several private collections. Tonight, she's with us not just as the editor of the Kweli Journal, but as the editor of Sing the Truth, the Kweli Journal short story collection. And as the buyer for the store, I have to tell you, I see lots of short story collections presented in publisher catalogs, but I do not often see collections whose contributors are as illustrious and impressive as Sing the Truths. As if a foreword by Edwidge Danticat wasn't enough, other authors include Nicole Dennis Benn, Naima Koster, Daphne Palasi Andreades, and others. You can see why the Kweli Journal has been hailed as the Paris Review of BIPOC literature. Also featured in the collection and in conversation with Laura this evening is Susan Muaddi Darraj, the author of A Curious Land and a finalist for the Palestine Book Award, a United States Artists Ford Fellow and past winner of the Maryland State Arts Council's Independent Artist Award. She is also the author of Farah Rocks, the first children's book series to feature a Palestinian American character. She's also the author of Behind You is the Sea, a favorite of East City Bookshop staff. It has been a staff pick at least twice, if not three times. One of those was mine. She lives in Baltimore, Maryland, and teaches at Harford Community College and Johns Hopkins University. Laura and Susan, thank you so much for being here. You can take it from here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
Susan, thank you so much for saying yes to our invitation.
Oh, my pleasure.
Grateful beyond
Absolutely.
measure.
My
Always.
pleasure. I'm excited to be in conversation with you tonight and talk about this amazing anthology. Yes, there is an illustrious list of authors in this anthology that you curated. I still don't know what I'm doing in this anthology, so thank you very much for including me. Um,
I loved your work from the moment I discovered you.
should we tell
On
them how
some-
we first met?
Yes, let's.
Okay.
So I recall seeing a post that you had on Facebook, I believe.
Yeah.
And it was a post that was announcing the very first chapter book series to feature a Palestinian American girl. And I said, oh my goodness, I have to have her. She has to come to Kweli's Color of Children's Literature Conference. And I reached out to you and I invited Susan and she said yes. And that was the beginning. But then I discovered your other books.
Right.
And then just kept inviting you to the festival, the international festival and readings. I could not. I'm sure there became a point where you said, oh my goodness,
Never.
wants.
Never. I was always so honored to be, Kweli is such a vibrant space, both the journal and also the conference spaces that Laura creates. The children's conference, the children's literature conference is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been in touch and been in community with other BIPOC authors for children, and the way that we discuss children, how we write about children, how we write for children, for their hearts and for their minds is so special. And all the work that you do is amazing. And so I'm just really really honored to just know you and just be in your community.
Thank you.
Can you tell us actually a little bit about how this anthology came together?
Yes, we wanted to do something special for our 15th anniversary year. And we had been talking about the possibility of putting together an anthology since 2020. Yeah. But things were delayed, didn't quite come together. So 2025 became the year. And I worked on it with a group of friends and agents from the Victoria Saunders Agency. It was hard to select just 15 stories out of the many that we had published. But of course, your story was an immediate yes. Truly, we love your work. Um, and then it became a question of choosing a publisher. And I met with a few of the editors, and Authors Equity was the one we decided to move forward with for so many reasons. First, they allow you to contribute to the process of putting together this piece of art. Yeah, they're open to all of your ideas. An example would be when we already had the contracts sent out to each author, we neglected to include the audiobook. And it was brought up during one of our monthly meetings. And the response from Authors Equity was absolutely yes, let's do it. There was no pause, let's reconsider the budget. It was just a yes, we'll do it, we'll make it happen. So it's wonderful to be a part of a publishing company that is invested in the partnership in every conceivable way and is open to all of your ideas. Yeah.
And it's such an important time, I think, in our country, in this political moment. You
Yes.
know,
Indeed.
when diversity is under attack
Yeah.
and equity is under attack,
Mhm.
inclusivity is under attack, these values that we fought so hard for,
Yes.
they're all under attack right now, and people are being marginalized more than ever. So
Mhm.
to have a book like this in which you create a union of these voices, you know, speaking their truth, singing their truths, is a marvelous thing.
Thank you.
And you approached, you just went right for the top. You approached Edwige Dandikat.
I did.
Laura doesn't worry about anything. She's just like, I'm gonna ask and I'm gonna see what happens. So how did that come about? How did Edwige Dandikat, because she's one of my favorite authors of all time. The
Mine
Forming
as
of
well.
Bones is one of my favorite books of all time.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I have been reaching out to Edwige since Kweli started.
Wow.
And the
Mhm.
very first invitation was for one of the children's conferences.
Oh,
And I asked her to keynote, and she said yes.
amazing.
She
Mhm.
didn't pause. She says, Laura, you know, all you have to do is ask me, and I'm there.
Oh, that's
And
wonderful.
that's the case at each and every turn. Whenever I say, "Are you available perhaps?" She says, "Well, let me look at my calendar, and if I can make it work, you can count me in."
Amazing.
Yes, she has the most generous heart, and you know the beauty and power of her work.
Absolutely.
And talking
100%.
about singing the truth, she exemplifies that.
Yeah. It's funny in the publishing industry, and there are a lot of divas in our industry, and she it's so nice when you meet someone who could be a diva if she wanted to be.
It is.
And yes, she's not. So that's wonderful. And her introduction, her foreword is really beautiful
It
in this
really
book.
is.
Yeah. Yeah. What were some of the challenges you had in putting it together, and what were some of the joys that you encountered in assembling these works? Like, how did you decide on the order of the stories, or the different communities that were being represented? What were some of the things you encountered?
Well, the first thing I did was just to choose the pieces that I fell in love with on first read. The challenge was not to choose all of the pieces that I fell in love with because we had limited space. We had to limit ourselves to 15 stories. It turned out to be 14, but we had to limit ourselves. But that didn't stop me from approaching Victoria Saunders' team and saying that I found 3 more stories I think we can add, and doing that every few days. So of course the numbers started to grow, so I had to be reeled back.
Okay.
So that was difficult. The joys, just being able to celebrate works that I found to be so powerful, so um, honest about the stories that we don't really hear about the lives, the communities that are usually relegated to the curb, like kicked to the curb. Those are the stories that I've always gravitated towards. Like, I want to know more about those histories. I want to know more about the truth that's been erased or buried. That's what I ache for. It was denied me in school, and now I want to be aggressive about knowing all I can to make a difference.
Yeah, that's amazing. I was actually thinking as a college professor myself that this is the kind of anthology I'll probably use in a classroom, you know, because I think that you know, as a literature professor, there's always the Norton anthology, you know, which is has the Bible paper and the thick, you know, it you need to have like a you need to like work on your biceps to carry that book around campus. Um, but even though they've gotten much better, of course, over the years since I was an undergraduate in representing diverse voices, they're still not quite there, right? Nobody's really quite there. So maybe an anthology like this is a good selection.
That would be wonderful. We're
Yeah.
so hoping that the anthology will make its way to colleges and to high school.
And high schools, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Um, something interesting, you know, a lot of the stories that are so these stories were originally published in the journal,
Correct.
right? And some of them have changed
Yes.
since then. So, for example, this might be interesting to many of you. My own piece in this anthology was published a few years ago in the journal.
Mhm.
I later took that piece and made it into a chapter in my current novel, Behind You is the Sea. But it's changed a little bit since I adapted it and retooled it to work it into that chapter.
Mhm.
And we talked about this, like, should I, which version should I put in this anthology?
We
And we
did.
talked about how let's keep that time, let's preserve the time
Mhm.
in which it appeared in the journal. Let's preserve that because that was an iteration of these characters and their story.
Mhm.
And let's keep it as it was because
Yes.
you know, that's how you came across the story and it was the
Yes.
readers of Kweli encountered it in that way,
Mhm.
right? Before it became a novel chapter.
I'm so glad that we reached that decision.
That was an interesting conversation. Did you have
Yeah.
any conversations like that with other authors about, you know, where their work has, because a lot of us who've published in Kweli, you know, Kweli has launched a lot of authors. I mean, it literally has launched many, many authors, and we're very lucky to have that space. So, did other writers or other contributors have any issues like that in which the work has changed or has gone elsewhere since first appearing in the journal?
Yes, I think about Delana R.A. Dameron's story, which became part of her first book, her debut novel, and it underwent some editorial changes. So that's one example. I'm trying to think of another. Let's see. Uh,
It's interesting.
Lahia de Shango,
Mm-hmm.
which is Ivelisse Rodriguez's short story, also went through changes with her debut.
Interesting.
Yes.
And did
So
they all decide to keep it as
they
it had
did.
been? Yeah. That's
Yes.
amazing.
Mhm.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
We have a few writers in the room, and I want you to make sure that you ask your questions during the Q&A.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
for sure. Hmm.
Okay.
We'll leave plenty of time for questions.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, I'll ask you one more question and then we can talk about other things. But um, as an editor, you've been teaching writing classes for a long time.
I have.
What, as an editor, as a writer yourself, I mean, you're talented in so many artistic genres, but as a writer yourself and as an editor, as a teacher, what are the types of things that make a story stand out to you? Like what, when you're reading several stories, how does one get lifted above the rest? Like what are you, what do you see in that story that makes you pause and decide to spend some time with that author's voice?
That's a great question. The first line usually pulls me in immediately.
The first line,
The
right
first
away.
line right away. And I also look for a strong voice. I look for multiple narratives within the story because I lean towards very layered pieces that I can go back and reread and then discover something new in each reading. That's what I love. Yeah. I also love to be fed. And what do I mean by that? I like what Toni Morrison describes as like vitamins in literature. Like I want to feel as if I've been strengthened, I've been not just entertained, but enlightened as a result of spending time with this author and these pages. Yeah.
That's
So
amazing. Yeah.
I'm greedy. I want all the things.
Yeah, all the things. I love that. I love that. Yeah, and the writing process is, about layering. Like I know when I'm writing for, not that I do it very well, but when I'm writing,
Yes, you do.
I even draw like the New York subway roadmap of my plot lines, like just to sort of make sure there's more than one thing happening. There's lots of things happening. There's lots of connecting subway trains and that sort of thing. So the layering is important, and the
Yes.
voice. Yeah.
I look for those connecting subway trains.
Yes.
I do. I do. Because while there is beauty in those stories that Edward P. Jones once described as one note stories, I like to hear all of the notes. Yeah. I feel that I change as a result to listen to that song, right? And then I want to hear it again and again and again and again. Yeah. You never tire of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Janine Capo Crusay, her work is in here.
Mhm.
She's that kind of writer, I
She
think.
is.
Yeah.
She is
Her
indeed.
first book that I fell in love with her first book, How to Leave Hialeah.
Yes. Wasn't
It's
it
a marvelous
spectacular?
book. Yeah, spectacular book. And she just put a novel out recently.
She did.
Yeah. Her work I think of as in that way.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So I first discovered the short story and then I fell in love with the book.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. That's
Mhm.
great.
Because it was chosen for one of the anthologies. So either the O. Henry or the Best American
Oh,
short
okay.
stories collection.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
That was my first introduction to her.
Oh, wonderful.
And then I pulled her into Kweli. It's like, can you come?
She's great.
It's-
Um,
Can we talk about your work?
we can, sure. Sure.
Thank you. So, how many of you have already read Cleaning Lentils and Sing the Truth? Yes. So, you know why I fell in love with the story already, those of you who are more than familiar. When you meet the main character, you're immediately pulled in to the narrative. You want to know more. You want to, like the questions that came up from the first few paragraphs made you want to puzzle this out, right? And as you moved forward and then came to know her family and the secrets, you were propelled forward in the narrative. How did you make that so easy, or at least look so easy on the page? Because I know it didn't present itself to you maybe in a full form or in a whole cloth. What was the first image that came to you when you started working on the story?
Thank you. So the story is about, and later I worked it into the novel. The story is about a young Palestinian American woman, Hiba, who's a college student, and she is obese, and she's experienced some bullying on her college campus. Her mother and
Sorry.
sister. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Was it also high school bullying?
She'd been bullied in high school as well. And she has a mother and a sister who have the ballerina body shape and are very deeply unsympathetic to her. And I teach college students and work a lot with younger people because of my children's work. And body image problems are really persistent for children of all genders, and really just it's just really difficult, especially in this age of social media. The way
Yes.
that young people look at their bodies is so 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 sad and unfortunate. They just don't see the beauty in themselves, really. We don't give them the chance to. And so because of the bullying, she's dropped out of school, and her parents don't want her to come back home. They're very angry with her. She's not the perfect model daughter. And so she goes to live for a time with her Palestinian immigrant grandparents, who are very, very old fashioned and don't even have Wi-Fi in their house.
No Wi-Fi.
So there you go. So her grandmother is a magnificent cook, and Hiba hates everything because she's trying not to eat.
Mhm.
And here's her grandmother making all of this food. And so what I'm trying to show in that story is that actually the grandparents, even though they're old fashioned, they have a very healthy sense of what beauty is. You know, they have not succumbed to American materialist culture in which you have to starve yourself in order to stand out in any way, and in which, you know, body weight makes you somehow invisible as a woman.
Mhm.
So it's a restorative story about generations.
Mhm.
And you asked about you asked about the technique I use, in which I sort of just give you a little bit at a time to
Yes.
pull the reader in.
Mm.
So full disclosure, I'm a notorious eavesdropper. So never sit next to me at a cafe if you see me, because I will listen to you and I will listen to your conversations shamelessly. And so and you should try it yourselves, actually, if you want to be
It's the best place
as
to
bad as
write.
I am. So
But you're not the only author who says that.
well, what I enjoy doing is I enjoy listening to people's conversations. Because, by the way, if you don't want me to listen to your conversation, talk more quietly, okay?
There you go.
But
There you go. It's true.
but people are on FaceTime like this, just talking loudly to people.
Mhm.
And so I feel like, you know, I have the right to listen. So, and people never tell you the story from the beginning. They're talking to each other. There's already an established connection.
Mhm.
So on the outside, here I am trying to piece together what is really happening,
Yes.
right? And so I think it comes from that, because people speaking on FaceTime or in person, they're never talking to each other like, so Michael, how was that job promotion that you received recently that you told me that you worked so hard for? And is your wife, who is an engineer, satisfied with your promotion? People don't talk like that, right? They jump right into the story, understanding that there is already some established knowledge between them. So
Yeah. And
I
that emotional moment.
and that emotional moment.
Mhm.
So I try to treat the reader as if the reader is already in on this conversation.
Mhm.
And I roll out little by little what you need to know, hoping that it will compel you to stay and be nosy and want to know what's happening with these
Yes.
people. So that's kind of how I do it.
Well, thank you,
It comes from a
because
very bad habit.
I'm grateful for your bad habit. I'm one of the nosy ones who will always be ready to explore every piece of art that you put on the page.
Thank you.
So,
Mhm.
please.
I was just going to add one more thing, which is I'm also very interested when people interact with each other. You know, I observe their body language, because
Mhm.
people often, when people use their words, they often don't say what they really mean, or
True.
they say something that's the opposite, or they project something different. So, when two people are sitting in a restaurant and they're talking and they're being exceedingly polite to one another,
Mm.
I'm like, oh, they had a fight before they came
Yes.
here. That's actually what happened. And then my mind goes wild. I try to imagine what were they arguing about. And then they're, you know, and then that's what happens. So
Yes.
I really am interested in the way that we use space with each other to hide what we really feel. Right. But it comes out nevertheless.
It always does.
It always does.
There's something that Britt Bennett once said during our festival in 2020. She was in conversation with Imani Perry, and Imani had asked her about the complex characterizations that she puts on the page. And she said that she asked herself a question about a secret that the character would never want to be revealed. And that's how they move forward. So when you think about your main character, what is the secret that she would want to keep close and never have shared? And then what's the secret that her brother, Amir, would never want to be shared? Because he was interesting to me, even though he spent less time on the page. He
Yeah.
still captivated me.
Yeah. I think Amir's secret is that his secret is that um, he performs, you know, so the idea in the story is that these two Palestinian immigrants had a daughter who bought completely into American materialist culture, and she married rich and she moved up in the world, and she's kind of disconnected from her parents, but her daughter is Hiba, who's the one who's my main character. So her brother Amir, I think, looks at his parents and he will perform for them, but his secret is that he actually has his own life, that he has no intention of following along in what his parents want. Which is easier for boys in immigrant families to do. You know, often in an immigrant culture, it's the girls who carry the burden of the, not that the culture is a burden, but it can feel like a burden because the parents are trying to preserve the culture. And it's usually left up to the girls to preserve the culture somehow. The boys get to explore and experiment with what being American means, right? And the girls, don't, right?
Yeah.
So Hiba's secret, I think, is that she actually likes her body, but she hates the way that people look at her body, you know. But she does like her body. Like she talks about the comfort she feels and the solidity of her legs and her arms and her hands and the way her face is smooth and her skin is lustrous and she feels good in her body, except when she's around other people. And then she feels bad in her body, you know,
Because
which is how it
start
works.
judging. Yeah.
Yeah. You feel the judgment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I also wanted to ask you about the apple tree. I was so in love with the way you introduced the apple tree as you talked about Hiba. Can you talk a little bit about that? I think the writers in the room would be particularly interested as well.
Yeah. So when you're writing fiction, you always want to, sometimes you come across an image or you put an image on the page and you like the image. And so you start to explore it a little bit more. And then it takes on its own meaning and resonance. And so in this story, there's an apple tree. So Hiba's grandparents, again, her parents are very wealthy and live in a very posh part of Baltimore City. Baltimore City, where I live, is a very segregated city, like many American cities are. Baltimore is deliberately segregated through the public transportation system. And so her parents live in a very posh part of the city that you would have to take multiple public transit lines to get to that part of the city. And then you still have to walk quite a bit if you did. Whereas her grandparents live in the same neighborhood where they first landed, which is a very working class neighborhood full of immigrants, full of people of color. And so that's where she's living, in that little row house in Baltimore with her grandparents. And so there's not much of a backyard in that little row house. So her grandfather, who was a Palestinian farmer before he was exiled to from his country, he is planting as much of a garden as he can. And he does it the way a lot of immigrants will do it, which is he takes any materials he can find. So he's trying to plant an apple tree in a small little corner that he's filled with soil. He's trying to plant an apple tree and it won't stand very tall. So he gets an old rubber tire that he finds and he puts the apple tree in the center of the tire. So this apple tree is standing upright because it's growing inside of this tire. And Hiba often will sit outside in that little backyard and she'll look at this apple tree and it's growing and it's very fragile, but it's still growing.
Yes.
And it becomes a symbol for her self-esteem, really, her self-esteem. And it's being nurtured by her grandparents.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love their relationship.
Thank you. Yeah.
There were some difficult moments in your storyline, and I love the way you balanced it with humor. Can you talk about that as well? There's a quote that I'd like to share first.
Sure.
And this one is by Danelle Mingestu. And his take on humor was, it lowers the reader's resistance to a character or scene and can make something tragic that much more powerful because of the contrast that it creates. So can you first pull us into that garden scene between Hiba and her grandfather?
Do you want me to read a little bit from that scene?
Please,
Okay,
yes.
let me just find the page. let me just I'm sorry, I'll find it 1 second.
I'll find it before you do.
Oh, okay. Um, oh, here we go. I found it. So she's sitting outside and he's doing his planting as well as he can in this yard. Um, and so he hands her some gardening tools. What am I supposed to do? She asked her grandfather as he handed her a trowel. Dig holes here, about 6 inches apart, he instructed her. And we're going to plant these. He pointed to a flat cardboard box like the kind they handed apples. I'm sorry, like the kind they hauled apples in from the outdoor market. It was filled with clumps of dirt. You're going to plant dirt? She asked him. He looked up at the sky. They claim she's in college, Heavenly Father. He spoke to the clouds. She tried not to, but in spite of herself, she giggled. So like there's little moments like that where you know, Palestinians are like a very resilient people, and we also have a tremendous like sense of humor that I've always found to be incredible. Like we will pay money for a good joke. Like we're just that kind of people, and so I find as a writer, I often write about very, very difficult themes. There is a suicide attempt in this story. There's body image issues. There's a lot of deep deep issues, and in my novel there's everything from domestic violence to murder to sexual assault. So there's a lot happening, and I feel like I don't really shy away from revealing the ugly parts of life, right?
We need to know the truth.
We need to know the truth, so I don't really shy away from that. But I do believe it's my job as a writer to be um every Palestinian wants their child to be like a lawyer or an engineer. So the closest I can be is I can engineer like an emotional experience for my reader. Okay, I can bring you down and really make you see the gritty things and the ugly things, but I can also lift you up a little bit and give you a break on that emotional journey, right? I can lighten the moment a little bit as the characters would. Like, Palestinians are, when they talk about some of the terrible things that they've experienced with um, occupation and other things, there is sometimes a sort of like nonchalant humor that's used, and so um, I try to replicate a lot of that and lighten the moment, but I'm doing that for the reader's sake, right? So that they'll stay with me in the story.
It creates such a beautiful balance.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask you about the historical footnotes in the story. So Sitz is the grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
and she stated that we lived through 3 wars. Lentils kept us from starving.
Mm-hmm.
Eating them reminds us of those days. So can you speak about the 3 wars and then the importance of memory in your work?
Yeah, so in the story, Hiba's parents, who again are living a much more posh life than the one they came from, they've done well financially in America. They kind of look down at that older generation, right? This is an unfortunate thing about immigration. Like immigrants will come here and work hard and scrape by, and then they'll raise their children who do very, very well. And then their children look down at and like, they're almost embarrassed sometimes by like their origins, right? And that's when I see that happening sometimes, it makes me very, very sad, right? So Hiba's adopted some of that unknowingly. She's adopted some of that maybe elitism from her parents. And so she's telling her grandmother, why do you cook lentils so much? You don't even like lentils as much. And there's when you're cooking lentils, you the way I grew up, like learning how to cook from my mother, is you put them all out on a pan and you move through them to check for like bad ones or little stones or things like that. You don't want to cook those, obviously. So you're cleaning them. That's how you're cleaning them. And as she's watching her grandmother do this day in and day out, she says, why do you cook them so much? Like you don't even like them that much. Like what? And her grandmother says, that line that you spoke, that, when times were really hard during the wars, these are the only things we could afford. And this is what kept us alive, Um, and it's funny, like hummus is that kind of a food for Palestinians. Like it's a very cheap protein, and now it's like a very posh. Like when I was eating hummus in school in the cafeteria, everybody made fun of me, but now it's like a very posh thing that everybody packs in their kids' lunches.
Yes.
So it's funny how food that people have viewed as like just basic sustenance, and they've livened it up with spices and things like that, has now become sort of like it's looked at in a different way, fashionable, trendy. Right. I don't think our ancestors ate hummus with like gluten-free rice crackers or things like that. So, but it's the wars that she's talking about are, of course, the many, many wars that have plagued the region over the centuries. And so, there have been many wars, and the Palestinians who were able to stay for as long as they could often had to like hunker down, right, as people do in times of war. And so they lived on what they could live. And so what she's saying here is that it's important not to forget your past struggles, because they've shaped who you are. And I think we all can see that and understand that with our own struggles in our own lives. Like we shouldn't resent those struggles, because we are who we are because of those struggles, right? And so she's just telling Hiba in a way to just embrace the past, as opposed to don't let it haunt you. Keep it, but don't let it haunt you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I can keep. Okay. Thank
Okay.
you. I have a few more.
Okay. And then we can open it up. Maybe if we take one more, then we can open it up for questions or something. Okay.
This is a feedback question. Now, I think you may have mentioned to me one of your close readers, a good friend of yours. So the question is, how do you know when it's time, as someone with an early draft, to share with a close reader? No Violet Bulawayo talked about the beautiful agony of facing the early drafts on your own. She said, you might, if you share it too early, you might write to the feedback and workshop you received versus honoring what the story is trying to be. So how do you know when it's too soon to share it with another reader? How do you know when it's cooked enough to pass it to someone?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So it's different with my children's writing. So when I was writing, I've written for adults for a long time, and recently I began writing for children with my Farah Rocks books. In those cases, interestingly, I let my daughter read the manuscripts.
Yes.
She's a very good editor. She would write it. She was 10 at the time, and she would write in the margins things like, "Mom, kids don't talk like this." Oh, okay. I didn't know. I was not aware. And then she would like, kids are such great readers. Like they even pass books to each other. Or when I visit schools, they tell me that they're writing a novel together. They'll make a notebook and pass it to each other, and they'll each write something. It's wonderful how they collaborate. So she would actually read it, and then she would give it to her friends. And so all of her little friends would write me little notes as well. So that was kind of nice. So in that case, I'm much more open to the feedback, because it's not the audience is not my generation or my audience, and I'm very open to feedback from the very beginning. But with my writing for adults, like when I'm writing a novel or a short story with an adult audience, it's different. It's like my characters stay with me for a long time, and so if someone reads my story and they begin critiquing my character, if I feel very upset about that, then I know I'm still too close to it and I'm not ready to show it yet. Right? It's like having someone criticize your child. You're like, excuse me, So I think when I can hear critiques of because my characters make flaws, otherwise they are flawed people. I mean, they make mistakes. Otherwise, this would be a very boring book. So they make mistakes. And so when I can hear critiques of their mistakes and their reasoning and the plot and what happens afterwards and how they handle it, then I know it's ready. Then I know I'm ready to hear that feedback. I think my sensitivity to hearing people talk about my characters is the line for me, if that makes sense. Because it's very personal. I mean, they live in your head. They're like real people in your head. Yeah. So
Thank you so
yeah,
much.
of course. Yeah.
Shall we?
Can I ask you about your writing process as a way of closing this? Because
Yes.
I love your writing as well. Can you tell us a little bit about your process?
I tend to not share the work with anyone until I've gone through at least 20 plus drafts.
Yeah.
And then I let them see it because then I feel it's ready to be seen and critiqued, and I'm comfortable with the margin notes, with the red lines throughout, and I relish it, right? Because I want it to get better. I want it to be the best I can be. Yeah.
Yes. And 20 plus drafts is not surprising. I mean, I do a lot of drafts as well. Like a lot of
Yes.
times people are shocked to hear 20, 30 drafts, but that's very common. Yeah.
it.
I mean, it should be common, I hope.
But I
Right.
find some students are like, it was done by draft 3. And it's like,
No,
no, honey, it
was
wasn't.
not. It was most certainly not done. And I can have all my daughter's friends read it and tell you that it's not done.
Yes. Agreed.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you for that question.
Of course. Of course. Shall
Shall
we
we-
open it up to other
Yes,
questions?
let-
Okay. Are there any questions or comments?
I know y'all have questions.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Mm,
What a great question.
yes.
What are the ways that we're finding joy right now? And what are the ways that we're protecting the joy in our work, in the work that the joy in the work that we're doing? It's a dark time
It is.
right now. But sometimes I think to myself, it's always been a dark time for someone, right? Like,
We've always had challenges and struggles and
right.
over generations.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I think about in past centuries and past decades, there have always been communities who've been enduring a dark time. It's just that the media never thought it was newsworthy to write about those struggles.
True.
So, and not that that makes me feel better or should make anyone feel better, but I think there's always going to be a there's always going to be a need to sing one's truth, right? There's always been that need to sing one's truth. My joy comes in solidarity. One thing about being Palestinian is it's being a Palestinian American has made me very aware of the struggles of many other communities. The Black community, immigrants, the LGBTQ community. And so I feel like solidarity is where I find my joy. And even sometimes when I'm writing for people that I know. I don't write to educate people anymore. I used to say, oh, I'm writing to educate people and let them know about my culture. I don't do that anymore because I feel like I'm writing now for people who are already allies as opposed to potential allies. Because if I have to convince you that my humanity is worth something, then you're not my people. So I think maybe the way my audience in my mind, the audience has shifted for me, and that's where I find my joy. And writing for people that already love me, as a person.
And they're able to listen.
Yes.
Yeah. Because listening is so critically important, but you find that there are not a lot of people who can be good listeners, right? They shut it down because they're too concerned with kind of pushing through their opinion or their they want their debate to be the most important thing in the room.
Yes,
Yeah.
there's like this war of narratives that
Yes.
starts to happen.
Yes.
And when you get to a war of narratives, the conversation needs to be over. I remember when Tamir Rice was shot by the police, I remember for weeks after the conversation that people on TV were having these debates on these, panels of TV, TV type people on these panels talking about, well, why do gun manufacturers make such realistic looking weapons? I'm like, that's not the story here.
Thank you.
The story here is that a 12-year-old boy was shot by the police. This is the story.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to go into a different narrative, then I'm not even going to participate in this conversation, right? So when you get into that war of narratives, then people are not listening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're not really listening to what you have to say.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Mhm.
So Joy.
Oh, there's a
you-
question back there.
Question.
A little bit about the process of running the journal and particularly how you make it sustainable.
That's a great question. The process of running a journal and how do I make it sustainable? I don't sleep. I'm literally up between 4 and 5, 7 days a week. We have a very small circle of support. And so I find that I have to wear multiple hats. I do everything, even with a small team to support me. And I try to keep my eye on the reason why I started Kweli to begin with. And that was essentially to help writers be heard, to help stories that were typically kicked to the curb or ignored, um, just not given space to find a home, to find an audience, to be able to sing the truth. Yeah. So that gives me, I guess, the energy to keep going, even when I get tired, because we all do, right? We're not superhuman. I left my cape at home today, but I I often have to remember why I started Kweli in those moments when I feel as if it's a larger weight to carry. And that helps me to keep moving forward. That, and I know that most people like Susan and other artists that I meet become extended members of my family, and they help me to also kind of shoulder the weight of it all. And I love what I do, right? I love how language and how story narrative can really make you understand what sound bites cannot. Yeah. They can help you grow. They can help you build your community, right? In all the ways, it's what nourishes me. Thank you for your question.
There
Additional
was another
questions?
question. No, I think we have time for
One
one
more?
more.
Yes.
You see the most marginalized people, like you do not see their stories and that are not being told, or you're not seeing Palestinian characters. Sort of speaking to the importance of like why we should have these diverse voices and what it actually does.
What diverse voices do for the culture?
Like it does do something. People whose voices aren't heard like are being heard. Kind of speaking to like the concept of like why it's important to have this kind of visibility. You have Palestinian characters in like the mainstream.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah. So I think, going back to the issue of narratives, there are so many horrible narratives about so many communities. And so, like, for example, in the United States, I mean, I grew up in this country, and I remember in college, I was in college as an undergrad in the early 90s, and I remember a professor telling me that there's no such thing as Palestine. This is like a made up identity. So that wasn't, I mean, that wasn't that long. My kids think it's a long time ago, but it wasn't that long ago. And now we're in a time where people are talking openly about Palestinians and liberation and the Palestinian struggle. So, visibility matters and it counts and it's important, because it contests narratives that people don't otherwise have a chance to contest. So, for example, in this country, there are only 130,000 Palestinians. we're not that many people in this country. And if you go to a Palestinian wedding, they'll all be there. Okay. But if you look at how much space we take up in the news, you would think we're like the most demonic people on the face of the earth because of how we're talked about, right? So most people don't actually get to meet a Palestinian person. For most people in my circle, I'm the only Palestinian person that they know. And so I get all the labels. I get to do all the work, of but if a book can do that, or if a story can do that, or if a children's character can do that, and it can normalize, you know like, I love when people read my books and they come away and they think, I read this book because I thought it was about an unfamiliar culture, but I actually feel very connected to this culture, right? Isn't that the goal, that you read works of people from communities and cultures and lifestyles different than yours, and you feel like you actually are connected to these people, and you actually they are familiar after all? That's actually the best feeling in the world. So I think that's why that visibility does matter, like the presence matters, right? Like, so yeah.
Yes. And the truth matters. Yeah.
Yeah.
No matter how many ways the truth or attempts to bury the truth occur, the truth will always rise because the truth matters. Yeah.
Feels like a great fit.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for those questions. Yeah, those were great questions.
Thank you so much, Susan and Laura. That was a wonderful conversation. It felt like the best kind of eavesdropping, a loud eavesdropping, although we're glad that all the writers who do it and learn so much from it, and then we get to benefit. Thank you all for being here. We will have a signing after a brief reset, and thank you to our Zoom watchers at home. We appreciate your presence.